I know Andrew has to leave fairly soon, and Nick seems to be nodding too, but it would be good just to get a few questions from you. I'm sure somebody must have reacted to something somebody said. Okay, we have one person here. We'll do them in threes. Alina is racing down the central aisle with a microphone. Who else violently agrees or violently disagrees with something somebody said? Okay, and if you're Alina here, somebody in the front row, and my colleague Jim will pass a microphone over there, and then there's somebody here. Sure. Do you want to say who you are and where you're from?
Hi, my name's Sam Harding. I work for the Campaign to Protect Rural England. We're an independent national environmental charity. I'm just picking up on something you mentioned, Nick, and I'm happy to hear from anyone on the panel in relation to the big society and the fact that you perceive non-state organisations getting involved. And I wondered if you could just shed a bit more light on how you feel the coalition sees that happening.
Okay, over there. Sorry.
Juliette Collier, Campaign for Learning. We're also an independent charity. I'm very interested in listening to Nick when he kind of explained that the reason for the speed of the cuts was actually political expediency, in that you need to deliver this within the term of before the general election. My main concern is that a lot of the things that I'm seeing happening right now are not planned, they're not understood, and the consequences of them won't be realised until it's far too late, and we've lost the expertise, we've lost the support mechanisms. And, you know, in doing all that for political expediency seems to me to be criminal.
Okay, is there one more here somewhere? No. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Hi, Deborah Carson from Local Government Improvement and Development. Just on the big society as well, actually. I'm interested that you kind of frame it in the kind of chaotic, I think was the word. And I wonder whether that's because in practice, when you're expecting councils to work, you know, in partnership with the third sector, as councils have been doing for a number of years with a lot of support, that perhaps that is just being framed to mean that everyone's going to be expected to do it with no support and no money, because that's how it appears.
Okay. We're big on the big society. It sounds like you're first, Nick.
Firing lad. Right. But fair enough. Just firstly on non-state organisations, I mean, there's a huge range of depending on different areas. So the welfare reforms, the work programme that is going to be using many more organisations, non-state organisations, to actually help people back into work. So different training, it could be training companies, it could be social enterprises, it can be third sector, it can be charities, it can be a whole range of different organisations. Rehabilitation revolution that Ken Clark has been talking about today, where you will actually be paying by results organisations, again, charities, companies, whatever, but also sometimes public sector organisations, paying them by their results in actually reducing reoffending, so that actually if their various kinds of rehabilitation programmes actually work and deliver, keep people out of the criminal justice system for 2 years, that's how they will be rewarded. So that's in that area. In another area, more directly relevant to your organisation, we are going to be introducing some quite radical reforms to the planning system, which will mean that instead of having regional spatial strategies, providing regional housing targets and all of that, the idea that it will be much more bottom-up, the plans will be much more locally controlled, but that the incentives for local authorities will be very clear, that actually the way to ensure that your revenue base is maintained is to be finding ways to build new houses, so that then it's local people deciding where they build houses, where suits them and their communities, rather than people in Whitehall or in government offices or in regional development agencies or regional assemblies imposing targets on areas that then don't get delivered because people don't want them and resist them. So there's all sorts of different areas where there'll be more involvement of non-state actors, and I already earlier in my little presentation talked about in how that works in the schools reforms as well. So I think it just depends on where. But the idea is that, you know, is wherever possible, we want other non-state institutions to get involved. To the lady at the back, you make a very good comment, and I want to apologise if I gave the impression that it was only about winning another election. I am democratic politician, and I make no apologies for the fact that we have elections. We're being criticised at the moment for delaying it for 5 years. Let me tell you, it'd be a lot worse if we weren't delaying it for 5 years. You do have to try and win the support of the people for what you're doing. But what I was trying to make is actually a deeper point, I think, about human nature, which is that nobody wants to have a sort of never-ending programme of misery. They want to feel that, it's like, taking off a plaster. Do you do it quickly, or do you inch it off little by little? And one of the most interesting people who came to the Institute for Government was the former Prime Minister of Sweden, who was a social democrat and led one of the most successful fiscal consolidations that any country has done. And he very much made the point that you've sort of got to get on with it. You've got to actually get it done so that you can offer people hope at the end of the rainbow. You can say, okay, that's over now. Now we can start talking about the things we want to talk about, what we want to develop, what we want to progress. Also, you made the point, which I think is a good one, and I am concerned about it, that certain decisions are being made now in haste without really thinking through the consequences. I'm certainly aware of some local authorities making decisions about, voluntary sector grants that worry me very much. All I would say is that in most areas, and I know that local authority budgets may not be one of them, but in most areas, the cuts aren't all, it's not all about next year. It's over 5 years. There's 4% in year one, there's 6% in year one. Now, I recognise that in some local authority areas, it seems to be being front-loaded, and I'm a junior backbench MP, I don't know why that is. But in general, across the public sector, it's true. I don't actually know why that is being front-loaded, because I know that the overall spending review is not front-loaded. The overall spending review is actually happening pretty steadily over the 5-year period. There was a third question, and I can't remember what it was now, but...
It was a bit about, again, the expectation of local government to do the, quote-unquote, do the big society, but with issues about resources.
Chaotic, that was it. Yeah. I mean, bluntly, there comes a question in life, is do you believe that planning works, that clever people sitting in a room can plan how people's communities should develop, or do you believe that it can't work? I believe it can't work. David Cameron believes it can't work. Nick Clegg believes it can't work. Chaotic, therefore, in our vocabulary, is a good thing. Chaotic is what our cities are when we see how people live, where restaurants spring up, where they close down, where people move to. Can you predict any of that? Would you like to live in a world where you could predict any of that? I certainly wouldn't. So I want there to be chaotic in the sense I want lots of organisations doing different things in different areas. Does that mean that some services will be available in some areas and other services will be available in other areas? Yes, it does. But frankly, don't we have that anyway? Isn't that what this postcode lottery we've all been bitching about for 10 years is about? And this was meant to be a result of a brilliantly planned, brilliantly top-down targeted programme that still produced totally diverse outcomes. So what I'm saying is let's actually give the power to people to create what they want locally, to pay for it locally, to vote for it locally. If that's chaotic in a bad way, then it's, I'm afraid, something that I'll vote for.
Andrew, I know you've got to go, but how do you respond to that? Because you've been a clever man in a room, presiding over a lot of top-down planning.
The point about tackling the deficit, whoever was in office now would have to be tackling the deficit. The question would be the speed of change. But Gordon Brown's plans from 2011 had big cuts. There were bigger cuts under the coalition. So this is a question of choice of speed. The point about chaos, though, is a different one, though. Chaos as an output is the human condition. Chaos as an input... shades of the poll tax. That's what you need to be careful of. And what the coalition has got to be very careful of is that it's absolutely right when you're doing big reforms and you're sure that they're right and you've worked through the detail and all that, you get on with them. But to think that big reform for the sake of it, and you're not quite sure how it all adds up, but you've just been told because you've read Blair's biography that you've got to get going in the first 6 months, because if you don't, then you'll lose your opportunity to do it thereafter. That, you've got to be very careful that that isn't chaos as an input, and if you have that situation, then I think you could have big problems with your outputs.
Steve, Isabel, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean,
In terms of the sort of the chaos, I mean, I think the chaos that our readers will be interested in. You mentioned about the Ken Clarke's reforms on prisoner rehabilitation, and I think that going forward could be a big theme. You know, it all sounds very nicey, and I think obviously there is a very strong case for looking at that. But how long is it going to be before we see the first prisoner who's being, you know, cared for in the community instead of behind bars and commit some outrage? And when you get these sorts of cases, then, you know, you're going to have serious negative media coverage from every paper, whichever way they lean. So I say we haven't really even seen the half of it yet on some of these issues.
Yeah. I guess where I start from on this is, you know, we've got to make some very significant adjustments in funding, and that is going to be painful, whatever timescale we decide to do it over. I think it's positively helpful that the government have been very clear about the timescale. That doesn't mean I necessarily agree with it. We'll find out in due course whether that was a good call. But I think it's very helpful that we've got certainty in that space. But it then seems to me that the sort of logical approach is to try to encourage a really honest and open discussion between public bodies and citizens and service users about what's the best way to handle this adjustment in funding. And all of the evidence that I'm aware of suggests that where public bodies do that, they end up having a very sensible and very reasonable conversation with their constituency. People don't refuse to engage with the discussion about having less resources or about making cuts. Very often, citizens and service users are very happy to engage constructively with those sorts of discussions. I think we've seen some of the sort of seeds of that approach in the government's work so far. We had the Treasury website inviting people to give ideas. I think there are some elements of this approach in transparency to putting a lot of information out there and encouraging people to engage in that way. But for me, I would prefer to see that sort of theme being taken forward in a kind of systematic way, really, encouraging the whole of the public sector to do its business in that way. And I don't feel we've got that at the moment. It seems to me, it does feel as though we've got a chaotic approach at the moment. It does feel that quite often we're missing out, for example, local government and kind of leapfrogging local government and almost deliberately trying to create very sort of turbulent discussions locally and encouraging local people to put pressure on to public bodies. And I just feel that if we could encourage a more sensible, a more level-headed, a more honest discussion through all of our public agencies, that would lead us to a better answer.
I just want to say one more thing, which is don't be duped into thinking that there isn't some cynicism in the timetabling of all this. I do accept what Nick says about, you know, ripping the plaster off quickly, but can you imagine the Lib Dems agreeing to have anything to do with these tuition fees if it was a year before or even, you know, 6 months before a general election? Absolutely no way. You know, they are banking on the fact that they will, you know, it's 3 years or 3.5 years till the next election, and they will therefore somehow be able to get away with it. But there certainly is a political timetable going on here.
I'm going to have to draw it to a close because I know some people have got a long way to go in the cold. I think Steve's point about going back to your localities and consulting over cuts is an excellent idea. Could I just say thank you very much to the panel for sparing the time to come and talk to us today. Thank you very much for coming. It's been interesting. We have drinks, canapes, and for those of us who are staying behind, conversation will continue. But thank you very much again, Nick, for standing.